Hey everybody, this is Jamie Cross again for GameDev.tutsplus.com, and I am a graphic designer and a game developer. And today we're going to be working on the tutorial for creating a platformer game in GameSalad. So once you open up GameSalad and get that ready to go, what you want to do in your project info, you want to make sure you have the GameSalad Arcade selected as your platform for this game, because this is going to be an HTML5 game that we're going to set up to use keyboard controls. So that's really the only setting you need to set here in Project Info. And then we can get going. The first scene we're going to work on is going to be what's actually the first playable level of the game. So let's rename Scene 1 to Level 1. And double click that to open it up. Now right now it's an empty stage, as all documents start in GameSalad when you start something new. But when you do download the source files, even though the stage is empty, in the images and sounds section of GameSalad, all of the images you're going to need to create this game in the tutorial are already there, and all of the sounds you're going to need as well are already there under those two headings, images and sounds. So you have all the base elements you need to start, and what we're going to do is add all the attributes and all of the behaviors and actors to get all of the action going and make this game. The first thing we're going to do is add the attributes to our game. So I'm going to start adding these. The first one we want to add is going to be a text attribute. I'm going to call that direction. Now I'm just going to add these now, so follow me along and add these to your game, and as we need them, I'll explain to you exactly what they do and why we're going to use them in the game. So the next one is going to be a Boolean. That's going to be key for the title. Going to do another one, another Boolean. Call that door open. I want to add a real attribute. Call that teleport X. I want to add another one, another real one. Call that teleport Y. I'm going to add an integer attribute this time for the score. So I'm going to title that score. I want to add another integer. Call that health. And I want the health to start at 100, so I'm going to fill that in right now while we're here. I'm going to add another real attribute. I'm going to title this movable X1. I'm going to add another one just like that, another real. Call it movable X2. I'm going to add another Boolean. Call that player dead. I have just two more to add. They're going to be two real attributes. The first one is player X, and the next one is player Y. Now that's going to take care of all the custom attributes we need in the game. And in case you don't know, an attribute in GameSalad is essentially like a variable in a regular programming language. So, for example, the player X and Y, I'm going to set those up to keep track of my player's position on screen, so we can always know the player's exact spot on screen. And that's certainly something you would do with a variable in another game. Or the score, or the health. Those are pretty self-explanatory. Those are going to keep track of your score and your health respectively. Now, before we add any actors to this game, I want to make a change to the scene settings for this first level of the game. So I'm going to click on the Scene tab. And what I want to do is change the size of the play area from 480 pixels by 320 pixels. That's this really small screen that is the GameSalad HTML5 screen size. I want our play area to be much larger because if you watched the intro video, you saw that the level scrolled around while you moved around in the smaller window. The level scrolled left and right, up and down. So I want to make a much larger overall play area. So I'm going to change the width to 4,800 and the height of my play area to 960. Now you can see the window stays the same smaller size, but the whole play area increased dramatically as I scroll around here up and down and left and right to this much larger area where we're going to create our scrolling level, and then the camera will follow the player around and scroll around the level as we go. So let's add our first actor to the game. I'm going to drag in this metal panel. This is going to be our main platform graphic throughout the whole game. It's going to be 90% of the platforms that you see on screen that make up our levels. There's going to be a few more, obviously, but this is going to be the one main one. So I double click that to go into its attributes editor, and under the physics settings, I want to change my bounciness to 0 so the player doesn't bounce when it hits or lands on this platform. And I'm going to turn movable off so the game engine knows that these platforms will never move in the game. And that just helps with performance a little bit. There's one other edit in this panel I want to make. In the graphics settings, you want to open that up so you can see all the different options down here. In the horizontal and vertical wrap, I want those to tile. And I'll show you why right now because I'm going to put one of these on screen. Let me scroll down here. Drag one of these on screen. Now when I click it and make it larger, it tiles, and I just get a row of these platform tiles across the screen. So just temporarily, I'm going to put this on screen here, add that, and then we're going to add the player and do some basic movement so we can get our player working here and start building our level right away. To start the player actor, I'm just going to click on Robot 1 here, drag that right up into the actors. I'm going to rename it to Player. In this new player actor, I'm going to double click that to go into its editor. And just like I did at the beginning of the game, I'm going to add the custom attributes we're going to need to make this actor work throughout the whole game. I'm just going to add them now. And when we need them, I'll explain to you exactly what they are and why I added them. So for the first one, I'm going to add a Boolean. I'm going to title that Jumping, and I want that to start as true. So I'm clicking true. For the next one, I want a real attribute. I'm going to title this Movable Offset. I'm going to leave that at 0. That'll be fine. For the next one, I want to make an integer attribute. I want to name that Jumps. I'm going to start that at 1. I want another integer attribute. I'm going to call that Jump Count. I'm going to leave that at 0 to start with. I want one more Boolean. I'm going to call that Level Complete, and I'm going to leave that as false as the default. Now there's a couple other edits I need to make under the physics settings for the main character. I'm going to leave the density and friction as they are, and the bounciness I want to turn way down to just 0.1, so it'll have a little teeny bit of bounce if it hits into something, but very little. And then I want to fix its rotation, and of course leave it as movable because that'll be moving throughout the entire game pretty much. So let's go back. Now let's add a couple behaviors to this main character so we can actually get it placed on screen and see how quickly this game can start to come together. So I'm going to double click that. I'm going to maximize this window and click on Behaviors. The first thing I want to add is an Accelerate behavior. And what this is going to do is give me gravity. So I'm just going to title this Accelerate Gravity. And I want to change some settings here. I'm going to set direction to 270, which is down. And I want the acceleration to be fairly high. So I'm going to make that 1500. I want that to be relative to the scene. Now after this accelerate behavior, I want to add a collide behavior. And I'm just going to leave it this way for now. We're going to change this in a minute, but I'm going to leave this set to actor of type metal panel. So it's going to collide with the metal panel. Now when I drag this actor in here, let it go, and press preview, we already have the actor interacting with the platforms. When I press the keyboard keys, of course nothing happens because we haven't set that up yet, but it falls, it has gravity, and it interacts with the platforms. So we have a good chunk of this going already. To get that collide set up the way I really want it set up though, you want to click on your home screen and go to Actors, the Actors tab, and we're going to add a tag here. So I'm going to click the plus button, add a new tag. I'm just going to title this Solid. And any solid objects are going to be put within this tag. Right now, that's just the metal panel. We'll be adding more as we go. So now when I go back here, double click the player, I want to change this to bounce when colliding with actor with tag, solid. And that'll still work. But what that's going to do for us is I can add more and more objects to this solid tag, and this same event will happen every time. So I don't have to add a new collide behavior for each and every object I want the player to collide with during the game. Now that we've got the main character started, let's embellish him a little bit by adding his animation frames. I want to create a rule for that. I'm going to title that rule Animate. And I want to check for an attribute now. And this attribute is going to be one of the ones we just set up within the player. So I'm going to go to the player. I'm going to say when jumping, there it is, when jumping is false, I want the animation to run. Because that's when the player will be on the platforms. You'll either be standing or you'll be walking if you're not jumping. So when you're not jumping, I want to animate. I'm going to drag in an animate behavior. Now I want to click on the Images tab, and I want to drag these images in one at a time. I have them already numbered, so you can tell the correct order in which they go. So I'm going to drag 1, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now you don't want the jumping one. Let me see if I can get it that whole name. That's called Robot Jump. That's the jumping frame of animation. You don't want to drag that one in. That wouldn't do you any good. That would just make your animation look a little bit weird. I'm going to leave this at 10 frames per second. And I want it to loop so that animation happens all the time. But I don't want to restore the actor image when done, because this actor image is the same as this first image. And again, you would get a little skip in the animation. So I'm going to turn that off. In this otherwise section down here, that's where we're going to place this jumping image, because that will only show when the actor is jumping. So let's do that. I want to click on the behaviors and do a change image. I'm going to drag that in. Go back to images. Just drag this image right in there. And it picks it. You could also, you get a long list here. Instead of looking through that list for Robot Jump, I just dragged it in from over here. So when I'm walking on the platforms, these frames will run. And when I'm jumping, this frame will display. And it's only one frame. That works fine for a jumping animation. Let me close these up. And we're going to have to add some movement controls before this is going to work right. What we need to do now to get this animation to display correctly is let this character know when it's either touching the ground or in the air. So I'm going to add a new rule so we can do just that. I'm going to call this check if I'm on the ground. And what I want to check for is the same thing that this collide does. I want to check if this actor overlaps or collides with any actor tagged as solid. If it does collide with an actor tagged as solid, that means it's on the ground. Only ground kind of objects will be tagged as solid. And if that happens, I want to change a couple attributes. The first one I want to change is the player's self jumping attribute to false, because jumping should only be true if you're jumping. If you're jumping, you're in the air. So when you're on the ground, it's false. I want to do another change attribute, so I'm just going to copy that. I'm going to change the player's jump count to the player's number of jumps. And what this is going to do later on in the game, when you pick up the double jump pickup, I'll change the value of self jumps from 1, the way we have it set up right now, jumps 1. I'll change that to 2, and then the player will be allowed to double jump. So if you were making a game where you wanted to triple or quadruple jump, you could make that 3, you could make that 4, you could do whatever you want with this number. In our case, we're just going to have 1 or 2 jumps. Now we need one other change here in the otherwise section. I want to copy this, I'm on the ground, and change this to I'm not on the ground, and make it true. So what's going to happen here is if the player is touching the ground, it's going to change these two attributes. And if the player is not on the ground, it must be in the air. So it's going to change self-jumping to true. Now if we run this, you'll see that the player falls, but now it's animated. There's the lights on its head moving, the lights on its waist moving, and it bounces up and down a little bit. That's using the frame-based animation of GameSalad. That's how GameSalad does animation, is using individual frames of animation. So what we're going to do next is set up the keyboard controls so we can move this guy left and right and press the space bar to jump. I'm going to close up these behaviors that we got going here so I can get some screen real estate. I want to add a new rule. I'm just going to title this movement, because this rule is going to handle all of the movement, all of the left and right and jumping movement in the game. Remember in the demo tutorial what I said was we're going to have the arrow keys, the left and right arrow keys, and the space bar are going to control all of the player's movement. So what I want to do here in this first part is say when the actor receives the event, key, and then the keyboard, if the right arrow is up, same thing again, key, if the left arrow is up, or key if the space bar is up. If all of those are up, that means the player is not moving. So if the player isn't moving, I want to make sure and stop its movement. The first thing I want to do that is change a couple attributes. The first attribute I need to change is the player's motion linear velocity x. And I want to change that to 0 because x is going left and right across the screen, y is going top to bottom. So if you're not moving right and you're not moving left, then you should stop. So I'm setting the linear velocity of x to 0. I'm going to want to change another attribute. We haven't used this one yet, but I have set it up. So I'm going to change the attribute. It's a game level attribute, direction, and what I want to change that to is null, which is essentially nothing. What this is going to do is later on in the game, this direction is going to help me set up and control the parallax scrolling for the background. So when my character moves right, I'll be able to know that the background should be moving left. Or if my character is moving left, the background should be moving to the right. And that's how parallax works. It moves in the opposite direction of your character. Now, to really get this movement to work, in the otherwise section of this movement rule is where I need to set up the rest of the behaviors to get the player to move left and right and jump. So I'm going to add a new rule. I click new rule. That just adds it down below where I want it. So I'm going to click that, drag it up into this otherwise section, and now you can see it's placed in there properly. And you definitely want it in the otherwise section or this isn't going to work out right. So for this first one, I'm going to move right. I want to set up another keyboard control. So if the keyboard right is down in this case, that means if you're holding the right key on the keyboard down, now is where we're going to actually move the character on screen. Now, to get the character to move to the right, we need to actually make him move. So I'm going to drag in a constrain attribute into this move right rule. And I want to constrain the player's motion, linear velocity, x. Like we said, that's side to side. And I want to constrain that to 150. And that's what's actually going to make the player move across the screen. Now we can test that right now. Even though there's a couple other things to add here, let's test that. I'm going to hold down the right arrow key, and now it moves to the right. Now I can't move left because I haven't set that up yet, but we can see at least it's moving right correctly. So let's copy this. Actually, I'm going to hold down Option and drag it. I'm going to say move left. There's a couple changes to make here. I want to change, of course, the keyboard. Change that to the left arrow. And then we need to make this minus 150. So it moves left. Now that's really all there is to it for this quick update. When I preview that, I can move right and I can move left. Now you can see that the character isn't actually turning to the left, which we're going to fix right now, but it is moving left and right. So to get that player to face in the correct directions, we need to add another change attribute. I'm going to add the first one to the move right. I'm going to change the attribute player graphics flip horizontally. And I want to change that to false. For the right character, I'm going to open up the move left. I'm going to make a copy of that change attribute we just added. I'm going to drag it down here, and I'm going to change it to true for the moving left. Now let's preview that. When I move right, he's facing right, just like it should be. And then when I move left, now it flips and turns to the left. And then it flips back to the right and back to the left again. Now there's one other change attribute we need to add to this move right and move left behaviors. So again, I'm going to copy this first one here just to make life easy. And what we want to change is game direction. And when you're moving right, I want to change game direction to right. And then when you're moving left, I want to change game direction to left. And like I said, we'll use these a little bit later to control the parallax scrolling. So when the player's moving right, the background will move left. And when the player's moving left, the background will move right. And this is how I'm going to know which direction things should be moving. So that's our move left and right routines. Now we need to add the jumping behaviors in here to get the jump functioning. Let's add a new rule to this. I'm going to drag that again up into the otherwise section, right below move left and move right. I'm just going to call this jump, and we're going to set up the jump behaviors in here. when the keyboard space is down, that's when we want you to jump. But there's also another check we need to put in here. So the other condition we're going to add, I'm going to click the plus button, and then I want to check the player's jump count, which we set up over here, jump count. I want to make sure that's greater than 0, so at least if you have one jump, you're allowed to jump. And if you don't have any jumps left, you won't be allowed to jump, even if you hold the space bar down. I want to check the attribute player jump count is greater than 0. So if the space bar is down and your jump count is greater than 0, then you're going to be allowed to jump. The main thing you need to do to jump is do a change attribute. So I'm going to drag that in here. And I'm going to change player motion linear velocity y to 525. And remember, y is up and down, so positive direction in the y direction is up. A negative direction for the y velocity would be down. So since we want to jump up, I'm using positive 525. Now there's a couple other things we need to do here to really make this work right. Let me add those before we test the jump. I need to do another change attribute to reduce this jump count. So I want to change the attribute player jump count to player jump count -1. So every time you jump, you're going to have one less jump, which for most of the game, you'll only get one jump. So you start with one jump, you -1, and then you can't jump anymore until you land on the ground. Once you land on the ground, just like we set up here, when you land on the ground, it resets your jump count back to the number of jumps you're allowed to have. There's one other change attribute we need to add, so I'm going to drag that in, and I'm going to change the attribute player jumping to true. And what that's going to do is that's going to let this animation routine right here, that's going to let it know to display the jumping image, because if jumping is false, you're on the ground. If jumping is true, it should display this image. So that's what's going to display the proper image when I'm jumping. So let's test that out. I can still move left and right, or in this case, left and right. And that's all working good. And then when I press jump, hopefully I fly up in the air and I get the correct image displayed for my character. And I did. It jumps. It goes up a certain distance. And even if I press the space bar repeatedly, I only get one jump until I hit the ground again. And then, of course, I get one more jump. And it's animating correctly. It's displaying the proper jumping graphic. So that's all working exactly as planned. Now that we've got the basics of the main actor movement down, what I want to do is add some more of the graphics and sprites that we're going to use in the first level of the game. So I'm going to go under Scenes and go to our first scene. I'm going to copy this metal panel. Just hold down Option and drag and it makes a copy of it. What I want to do is I want to change the image that's used for it. So under Images, I want to add this platform image here. I'm just going to drag that over top the metal panel. And the image replaces it. And I'm going to just rename it to platform. And this platform has the same properties as the metal panel, so I don't need to make any edits to it. I'm just going to leave that alone. I'm going to copy this again. And down in my graphics list, I want to add the toxic waste. So again, I'm just going to drag that image over this, rename it. The main properties for this toxic waste image don't need to change, but there is one slight change we need to make to it. In the home screen, since I made a copy of the metal panel, it's going to be tagged as solid just like the metal panel. And I don't want that. It shouldn't be tagged as solid. Later on, we're going to change it so it kills the player if the player touches it. So we don't want the game engine to think it's solid like the metal panel and the platform. So I'm just going to delete that from the list of solid objects. It stays where all of the graphics are. It just deleted it out of that one tagged area. There's a couple more actors I want to add. So now I'm going to click the plus button just to add an empty actor. Then in this list here, I want to add what's going to be used for the door to let you leave the level. I'm going to rename this button red. To this new button red actor, we're going to need to add a couple behaviors to make the door function properly. Remember in the intro video, when the player walks up to this door, it's going to unlock and allow the player to pass through and move on to the next level. And we need to add a couple behaviors to make that function properly. So I'm going to add a rule. This first rule is going to actually allow the door to open as long as the player has the key to open it. So I want to check to see if the player touches the door. So if this actor overlaps or collides with actor of type player, and we have to check if the player actually has the key in his possession yet or not. We use one of the attributes that we set up at the very beginning of this lesson, key. So we're going to check to see if key is true. So if the player touches the door and the player has the key, then we're going to allow the door to open and then the player can leave and move on to the next level. So I need to change attribute. I'm going to change the value of, again, another attribute we set up at the beginning, door open, to true. So once door is open is set to true, the door animation will run and then the player can leave the level. One of the things I want to happen is, I don't know if you noticed, it's fairly subtle in the video demonstration of the actual game. This red area, when the player touches the door with the key, it turns green during the unlock door animation. So I want to also make that turn green when this happens. So we need to add another rule that says if the attribute game door open is true, which is only true right here when the player touches the door and the player has the key, then we want to change this image. And that's a change image behavior. And I want to change the image to button green. Now there's one more part to the door to make it function properly. There's like a beam, a force field beam that rises up above this door button. So we need to set the actor up for that. I'm going to add a new actor. Back in the images, that's called door beam right here. I'm going to drag that in. I'm going to rename it to door beam. We need to make some changes and add some behaviors to this door beam as well to make it function properly in the game. So I'm going to double click that. First thing I want to do is change its color so it's not this gray color. I'm going to click on the color wheel and just come over here and pick a red. I'm going to need to add two rules here. So for the first rule, this is going to be the rule that actually animates this beam during the door unlock. I'm going to call this open door. And what this is going to check for is the game attribute, game, door open. When that's true, and we just set that to true in the last step, so when that becomes true, this rule is going to play a sound. So I'm going to grab a play sound behavior. There it is, play sound. And the sound I want to play, and remember these sounds are already imported into the empty project for you that you've downloaded. I want to play the finish level sound. Then I also need to change a couple attributes. The first thing I want to do is change the color of this door from red to green when it's opening. Just like the button on the pad that you touch to unlock the door changes from red to green. Instead of changing the image though, for this version, we're just going to change the color properties. So I'm going to change the attribute door beam, color, red to 0. I'm going to make a copy of that. And I want to change door beam, color, green to 1. And what these color values do, these are actually, there's also, let me go in here and show you. If we're looking at this, I think it might be a little easier. Under this color section, there's red, green, blue, and alpha. And this actually gives you access to the RGB values of your actor. And of course, an alpha value as well. So by controlling those here with the change attribute, this is going to change from red to green when the door opens. There's a couple other things I need to do to finish this door off. This actor needs to animate where it's going to shrink down to nothing, like the force field is closing off during the animation. And I'm going to use an interpolate behavior to do that. What I'm going to do is interpolate the door beam's size, height to 0. I'm going to let that last 1 second. And I'm going to choose an ease in. Then I have one last attribute to change. So I'm going to change attribute. And what I want to do is delete the key from the player's inventory, because since they've opened the door, the key would now be gone. So I'm going to go key, game key to false, because now they've used their key to unlock the door. I'm going to close that up. We need to add one more rule, and this door will be finished. What this is going to do is actually delete this actor from the play area when it's gone, when it's shrunk down. So I'm going to check for the attribute, door beam, size, height. When that actually equals 0, I want this actor to be completely removed from the screen. In this new rule, I'm going to add a change attribute. In this attribute, I'm going to change game, door open, back to false. And why I'm doing that is this is just for a little cleanup. When you start the next level, this will already be set to false. And even though the door is open, now that I'm going to delete it, I'm just cleaning this variable up by setting it back to false like it should be at the start of any given level, because the door shouldn't be open, it should be locked. So that's why I'm changing that door open to false right here. And then what I want to do is actually destroy the door so it's gone. So there we go. That's just a little bit of level cleanup, really. But it's good to keep that stuff in mind as you're building your game. There's just a couple more things to do to this door before it's complete. Under the physics, I want to shut those off, 0 them all out, and also make the door not movable. And also on this door beam, one thing we want to do, or definitely have to do to make it work right, is I need to add this door beam to the solid tag. So when the player runs into it, he doesn't just pass through it. If that wasn't in the solid tag, he would pass right through it, and the door wouldn't seem like a door anymore. So you want to make that update. Then also on this button, I just want to 0 out the physics on that and make that not movable, since it's never going to be moving on screen. So right now our game would have a door with no key to open it. So let's add the key. I'm going to add a new actor. Under the images, this series of images right here, these 4, are 4 animated frames for the key. So I'm just going to drag the first one in here, let that go, title that key, and we'll make some edits to this. The first thing I'm going to do here is 0 out those physics and make it not movable. So it's really just going to be a pickup. It's not something that's going to be moving around on screen. I want to add an animate behavior. So I'm going to drag in animate, and then go to images, Drag in these 4 images right here. I'm going to deselect Restore Actor Original Image. Or just like in the player, you'd get a little bit of a skip here because it would show this first frame twice, because we have the first frame here and then here again. All that's really animating is in this center area of the purple. These lines are spinning around. It's a little small and a little hard to see on screen, but if you look close, you'll be able to see it when the game's playing. Now I need to add that rule. And what this is going to do, it's going to check for if the player touches this. So if this actor overlaps or collides with actor of type player, then some different things are going to happen. The first thing that's going to happen, we're going to play another sound for the pickup sound. I'm going to drag in play sound. We want to do the get key sound. I need to change a couple more attributes. The first attribute we need to change is game key. We need to change that to true, because at this point, once the player touches the key, he's got the key. So you want to tell the game that your player now has the key. And then I want to add some score. I want to give the player a little bit of score for picking up the key. So we're going to change the attribute, game, score. We're going to change that to game, score, plus 100. Plus 100. So the player will get 100 points for picking up the key. And then when the player picks up the key, we want to destroy it from screen so they can't come back and pick it up again and have multiple keys. So you just drag in a destroy behavior. So now when the player touches this, it's going to play a sound, store in the game that the player has the key, add 100 points to your score, and take this actor off screen. That's it for this first tutorial in the Building a Platformer Game in GameSalad series. In the second tutorial, we're going to add some more elements to this first level. We're going to add an evil droid, we're going to add some special effects, and we're going to build the level structure for the entire first level. So make sure and come back for the second tutorial, and we'll keep this moving along.